sponsor-driven drone shows are, I think, something that's fairly common right now and will become more common over the next 12 or 18 months as brands start to see the value proposition of accessing an audience and the social sharing of an audience that just so happens to be brought to you by beer company X or clothing company Y or whatever it may be at the end of the day, and getting the sort of halo effect of bringing a unique experience to an audience that are appreciative of what this brand has provided.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. My day job is I own a 50-plus person digital marketing agency, Did It, that has traditional marketing as well, including direct mail. I also own a brand, Truth Nutrition, and run a nonprofit, Giving Forward, so I'm pretty busy. Under those roles, one of the other things I do is invest, and I'm an investor in the Possible Conference, which happened recently in Miami Beach, and that was where I got to meet Bernard Ozarowski and his team at Pixis Drones. So I'm super happy to have you on as a guest, Bernard, because drones and drone shows are sort of the replacement for fireworks, but they're way better because you can't do marketing messages with fireworks, and you can do marketing messages with drones. So I'd love to hear like the origin story, like how did you end up in this business? Because it's a pretty new business overall, right? It's only been fairly recently that you could do the kinds of stuff that your drones do.
Of course. So the industry in the U.S. has really only been around for about 3 years. Our company was one of the forerunners. Our founder, Brad Nierenberg, he saw the drone show at the Tokyo Olympics and thought to himself, "This is the next big thing. This is something that we should be leaning into." And as a result, he comes from an experiential marketing background. So our first show was a small show for a wedding, and our second show was the Super Bowl. So we really hit the ground running because most of the other companies who do what we do come at this from the fireworks space or from the drone space and have moved into drone light shows. We came at this from the experiential marketing space. So it's given us, I think, a different perspective and a different angle in how we approach building out these drone shows. On a personal perspective, I've worked at a law firm in New York City in white collar criminal and regulatory defense for close to 15 years. Brad invited me out to a show. I saw the NBA logo 32 stories tall in front of my face, in front of the Statue of Liberty, and I had one of those eureka moments of seeing something that was so cool, so mind blowing, and so amazing that I did the thing every lawyer dreams about and got out of law to chase something that I could actually feel passionate and excited about doing.
Cool, cool. So one of the questions you probably get, your sales team probably gets when they get a call is like, how much is this going to cost? And those some of those same people are going to be folks who might have just been interested in the spectacle, right? So they may happen to know what Macy's pays for Gucci to come out and blow things up in the sky, right? Because they've seen it in the news, but they may have no idea as sort of the range, right, for the wheelhouse of a small to medium-sized drone show all the way up to some of the big stuff that you've done. What types of numbers are people going to need to dig into their pocket for?
Sure. So, a smaller show for us starts around $35,000. The bigger premium shows for things we've done for, say, just use example clients without getting into the specifics of their deals. But for a NASCAR or Monday Night Football or things like that, we're looking at something in the low six figures for where pricing comes out. But we're deal makers. We're always happy to figure out ways to bring things together, to make things happen, and figure out creative ways to make it make sense for us and to make it make sense for our partners.
Cool. Well, and using the word creative as a jumping off point, you guys have done some really creative things from the choreography of the drones, and I'm sure that technology and the computer's ability to control those drones is sort of changing on an ongoing basis. But you have the ability to do logos, you have the ability to do animations. It's not quite a TV screen, right? because the pixels are basically a drone, right? But you are able to communicate messages, you're able to animate things. And I would imagine that sort of the runtime element of the cost is sort of all that prep work, right? Taking the messaging, coming up with the storyboards, etc. So, how active are your teams in, collaborating with the marketing teams or the show teams in saying, okay, well, we've got X amount of runtime, we're going to choreograph this with sound and or music, right? And so, here's what our recommendations are.
I think that's a big part of what distinguishes us is we look at this as a storytelling medium. I'll give a couple of examples and then sort of go back and loop back to the tech of how it all works and how we tell these stories. But I think we want to be doing more than replacing fireworks, and we want to be doing more than just putting a logo up in the sky for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. We want to be telling a story, something that can actually connect to an audience. One of my favorite shows we've done was for Netflix for the premiere of their show One Piece, the live action version. Now, I wasn't too familiar with the property, but apparently the manga has been around for 30 years. The anime has been around for 17 years. There's a big built-in fan base. So when we did our show, it was actually at the Santa Monica Pier, and Netflix had a preview event for 2,000 One Piece fans to come out and see the first episode outdoor at the pier, everyone dressed in costume, things like that. At the end of the episode, it counted down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Everyone turn around. So everyone turns around, and our drones are up in the air, counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, One Piece. And there's a moment that has stayed true throughout the manga, the anime, and now the live action, where the mentor figure, the kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi figure of the series, it's like a supernatural pirate story. The Obi-Wan Kenobi figure puts a straw hat on Luffy, the protagonist. It's very iconic image, the older figure leaning down, placing the hat on a boy. The audience lost their minds. It sounded like a game 7 walk-off home run, a Super Bowl touchdown, because we were giving people an experience that they have known for years, that they have loved for years at a scale they've never before seen, all brought together in this community experience of all of these One Piece fans seeing the thing they love brought to light in a whole new way. And it speaks to what our real commitment is, which is storytelling. We have a new creative director who joined the team about 2 months ago. He had been the creative director at St. Jude's, and in the time that he was the creative director, let's just say their donations spiked up quite a bit. Just a really bright creative guy named Mike Hamlet, and he envisions what we're doing less as less what the technology is now and more what the technology can become. He likes to think of us as filmmakers in like 1906, trying to figure out how we go from recording a guy going on a horse or a train coming into a station and how we turn that into real narrative engagement in the sky, how we turn that into real storytelling. How do we get to be the George Méliès of drone shows crashing a rocket ship into the eye of the man on the moon type of thing? Is his vision for where we want to go creatively. And I think part of the magic is figuring out how we can do that. Some brands are very easy. You could tell a story with One Piece because there's so much to lean on. Some things are more complicated. We did a show for an architectural group called HNTB a couple of months ago. And the question was, how do we create a narrative here? How do we do something that people on the ground are going to respond to for their, I believe it was their 110th anniversary? Now, their logo is something they call the spark. It's basically an orange cube. What we did is we built the spark out and we made it the bedrock. We made it the founding point of the major achievements throughout the firm's history. Here, the spark becomes a bridge that was built in the 1920s, an overpass that was built in the 50s, a train station, an airport, Levi's Stadium, with this through line of the creative spark of this group serving as the bedrock for each of their biggest achievements over the last century plus. Finding ways to crack that storytelling is, I think, what excites our team and is perhaps the most unique thing about a drone light show compared to, fireworks or a lot of typical experiential activations that one may see.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine it also broadens out who your sales team and business development teams and are talking to, right? It's not just the folks who would typically be in charge of event production, right? If it were to be a fireworks, then it's just event production, right? As you start to move into storytelling, you're going to be chatting with more and more senior people with strategic roles, with creative roles at either the agency side or at the brand side. And so how has that changed your marketing strategy in that, you're not going to the same people as you might otherwise be going to if you were just a fireworks guy?
It's one of the most interesting parts about it because we have had shows paid for by experiential, by social media, by conventional media, by outdoor, out of home. All of these different lanes see the value proposition of what we bring to the table. So, in some ways, yes, we are. We're the world's biggest billboard. If an out of home, if an out of home group wants to look at us. In other ways, we're experiential because we can build entire activations and ground footprints around what our shows are capable of doing. And certainly there's a media component because a huge portion of the ROI of one of these shows comes from the fact that when you're there, and you saw it possible, Kevin, every single person takes out their cell phone and records it or live streams it or TikToks it or Instagrams or whatever your social media of choice is. These things create their own sort of cascade effect upon themselves. And what's fun to see is sometimes the old shows come back. And all of a sudden, we get a big spike in people. They just, I think, released a new season of the animated version of One Piece on Netflix, and we saw a big spike in traffic around our live action show that we did, last August. So there's a lot of lanes where we get engagement and where brands can see value from bringing what we do to the forefront.
Cool. Well, from a pricing perspective, I would imagine there's sort of the at least three different primary factors. There's the creative work you guys have to do up front with telling the story and animating that story. There's the number of drones, which may or may not change with the deployment, and then there's a runtime. So, which of these is the primary factor in cost? Is it the number of drones? Is it the runtime? Or is it the sort of upfront strategic and creative work?
It's a little bit of everything. Part of it is operational logistics because we have to get the drones to where the events are, and we house drones around the country. But if we're in Southern California with drones and we need to be in San Francisco, there's a whole deployment around that. We've got trucks driving around the country, drivers, teams, different pilots, sort of bringing everything together. There is a bit of a giant traveling carnival element to all of this of getting hundreds of drones, of finding the right location, of having them all laid out, of doing the proper testing to ensure that we have perfect shows when they go up. That's a big factor of it. I think creative and the time put into creative is something that's very important. We can turn these shows very, very quickly if need be. We just did a show in the Bahamas about a week ago for the World Athletic Relays. It's a qualifier for the Paris Olympics for relay teams that we turned in about 7 days from contract to flight. But that's not the dream. We would much rather have more time to work on creative, to go back and forth more, to put more thought into the storytelling than those kind of short-term activations allow. And to your point, that is a big part of what goes into the pricing and everything else. Really the only thing that we try to be as turnkey as possible. So the only things that we don't build into our pricing model is just site fees because they can vary from $0 if you control the location to $500,000 for the strip on Vegas during Super Bowl week. And content capture, because similarly, you can do something very lo-fi, or you can have a half dozen drones flying in and around the swarm while it's up in the air.
Cool, cool. So the storytelling element of your sort of value proposition, I think, is probably going to end up being really important for you guys on a go forward basis, right? Because eventually you'll have 30 more competitors, right? And if they don't have that, to some extent, just like everyone now is a movie creator, including with their iPhones, right? So eventually, what differentiates is the quality of the creative. So, do you feel like to some extent that means that your ability to collaborate with the clients is going to be super important because you've got your new guy Mike, who's your creative director, but of course he can't work in a vacuum, right? He can be a catalyst. He can help guide things in the right direction. But in the end, right, it's going to be which clients you bring on, which are going to also determine how creative you can be.
Of course, and it varies tremendously by clients. Some clients say, you know what, we trust you guys, go cook, come back to us with your big idea and let's talk it through. Other clients come in with a clear idea of what they want to do, of what they want out of a show. And a lot of the creative process there becomes how do we steer it in a way that best deploys the tech? How do we share our earned experience to make sure that the show that is coming together is as good as it possibly can be? I mean, I think we have really doubled or tripled down on creative as what distinguishes us. And if you think about it, you made the analogy to, anyone making a movie on their cell phone these days. But you as a movie viewer know within just a few minutes of turning on a movie, is this something good or is this something bad? Is this an Oscar nominee or is this a, sci-fi channel Saturday night at midnight schlock movie? You can tell instantaneously. And I know that right now, not enough people have seen drone shows to have that kind of experience and that visceral reaction. But I'm confident that when people who have see our work and compare it to any of the other work that's happening in this industry, they're going to see that we're doing something very, very different creatively. And I'm confident that as this stuff becomes more ubiquitous and it becomes more commonplace, folks are going to start to see what the commitment to creative means and what the commitment to how we best leverage the footprint of these shows for our brand partners means as a value proposition.
Absolutely. Have there been a lot of sort of, I guess I'd call them triangular relationships? Because some of the events that you talked about, there's essentially sort of the venue slash show producer. Then there's sort of potentially a deep pocketed, hopefully, sponsor, right, who wants to be able to participate. And then there's yourselves, right? And sometimes there might be an agency involved as well. So um, is it really varying as to sort of who that original catalyst was to say, hey, we should talk to the Pixis drone team. It'd be really cool to do this, tell the story in that environment. Because if it was the show producer, like let's say CES, right? For next CES, you could have the CES sales team say, "Oh, we want to do. We'll just go out and find a sponsor for Pixis." But it could also be one of the biggest sponsors at CES who says, "Hey, at CES, we want to do something as a drone show with Pixis," right? So, or it could be the agencies involved in those things as well. Are you getting a sense as to sort of how that's working out? Is it sort of more often one versus the other?
A ton of the work that we're doing, and it's by choice, is in the agency space because we want to. Look, we're a company that wants to lean into the things that are a little bit more difficult to do, and
Right.
in the agency space and with premium brands, there are a lot more things that need to be done and need to be done the right way. When we worked with Bandai Namco, they were amazing partners, but every single light, every single bit of where Pac-Man is depicted needs to be done in exactly the right way to live up to the brand guidelines because they want to make sure that anybody who sees a Pac-Man light show in the sky, it's synced up with their expectations of Pac-Man that they've had for the last 45 years. So we're, very, very comfortable in that space. In terms of how it comes together, sometimes it's the case where an event wants a show and they go out and find a sponsor. Sometimes a sponsor comes to us and says, hey, we want to go do a show at event X or event Y. How do we bring all this together? We did a show for UConn to celebrate the men's national championship basketball team. And the way that came together is that Miller Lite, through their agency, came to us and said, hey, we're thinking about this. What do you guys think? And we ended up doing a show at UConn sponsored by Miller Lite, celebrating the history of men's basketball championships at the University of Connecticut. There are other situations where, say, with the Miami Dolphins, where, we were down the pike of doing a show and then the Hard Rock Casino, stepped up to join in as the sponsor. So sponsor driven drone shows are, I think, something that's fairly common right now and will become more common over the next 12 or 18 months as brands start to see the value proposition of accessing an audience and the social sharing of an audience that just so happens to be brought to you by beer company X or clothing company Y or whatever it may be at the end of the day, and getting the sort of halo effect of bringing a unique experience to an audience that are appreciative of what this brand has provided.
Sure, yeah. You just made me think about the fact that some of these events are televised or broadcast or whatever word you want to use. but of course, the experience of being on site is quite different. Having been to a couple of drone shows, including yours, and I actually don't know if the earlier ones were also yours or not, because I didn't have the benefit of being introduced to you for the other shows, or to the producers for the other shows. But the big impact is if you're seeing it live, right? It's sort of cool, even with the Olympics one, right? The people who saw it on TV, I'm sure that it sort of paled in comparison to the people who got to see it live. And the same thing is true, I'm sure, for your events. So as the sponsors are thinking about, okay, we want to do this, we want to decide how big to do it. Are they sort of doing the sort of relative ROI calculations like, okay, we've got, you know, 8,000 people who are there. We anticipate that it's also going to be broadcast to, an additional, 1.6 million people, right? But we don't think we're going to get quite as much impact for those broadcasts. And then there's sort of the PR element of it, because some people, and the social media element of it, like of the people who are live, will get sort of that as well. I mean, it does sound like a fairly complicated ROI calculation, or reach calculation.
It is a complicated ROI and reach calculation, but I think part of the downstream benefit is that most of the social media that we get from these things isn't because the brand tweets or Instagrams or
Right.
TikToks the shows. It's because normal people are. So we're creating true organic re-engagement for the brands where, just to take the One Piece fans, for example, they're sharing into their community of other anime, manga connected people and saying this is this amazing thing that Netflix did to support the property that we love in a much more organic way than you get when it's just Netflix resharing it. You get this sort of cascade effect of being able to leverage the in-person audience. Now, I don't want to kid you here. This is a better experience in person, as you know, that when you see a flamingo, 270 feet tall in front of your face, taking off to fly. Very different when it's a couple hundred feet away from you than it is when you see it on a cell phone or on a TV screen. But everybody who was at the Possible conference and shared it and put it up and things like that, they're creating a natural outreach for Possible going forward, that look at the types of things that Possible does and look at the type of experience you can have if you come to Possible next year. And if you're engaged with what Possible is doing over the next year, I think it creates a really unique way to reach people at different levels. Look, the on the ground activation, the people who see it in person, they're having the best experience. But other folks who are seeing it downstream are having a good experience, or having fun, or getting some joy out of this coming across their social channels that I think has significant value.
Yeah, I think the other key, and that why I like the fact that you're sort of creatively focused, is the story needs to be on brand, right? So
Yes.
whichever the sponsor is needs to find that perfect balance between telling their own story and telling the story about, where it's happening and what the activation is. And I'm pleased that you have sort of a storyteller on board to make sure that people aren't just sort of band-aiding on, the flying logos and thinking like, okay, that's it, we're done, we're doing our drone show is done, because all of that, uh halo effect, right? It comes from that storytelling adventure that happens, not just the logo in the sky.
Yeah, but I think that's really spot on. And the brands that let us have a lot of fun with it's incredible to work with. So we just did a few shows with McDonald's for the launch of their new Cosmics brand. And Jeremy Cohen, who's our head of client services, but also works in creative, led the development there. And they wanted to do something unique to launch Cosmics. And what they've done from a brand perspective is the name and the sort of iconography around it all dates back to this early 80s McDonald's character. There's some weird stuff in McDonald's history of characters and things like that called Cosmic, who was this little spaceship thing that existed for a year or two in the early 80s. And our concept, what we came up with and working with the agency folks on this, was to sort of lean into UFO mystery and things like that. So we first created this sort of weird lights in the sky, kind of like the Marfa, Texas lights, and this kind of blinking effect, what's going on, to get people's attention. And we sort of squatted different locations around Dallas where the first restaurant was opening. The sort of sparkle effect turned into these sort of shooting stars. It created these weird concentric circles that feels very much of that alien autopsy type of imagery and pulled the viewer through those circles to a black hole. And gradually out of the black hole, repurposing the drones from the black hole quite literally to what we were building, we built the cosmic logo out of a black hole, sort of pulling it out of this 40 years that it's been lost to the IP nether realm, pulling it back out and creating a giant 3D version of Cosmic in the sky. It didn't have any conventional brand logo. It was meant to be a creative way to show this new thing happening, to create a footprint, and leaned into it with some influencers, things like that. But it's something that we're very proud of because we were able to take what one may think is sort of very conventional brand identity and do something very, very creative and off the wall with it. Was something we're really, really proud that we had the chance to do.
From the way you're describing it and the choreography of the story, it sounds like part of what you need to do from sort of the on-site activation perspective is that you actually sort of need to start slow and build momentum so that everybody's tapping each other on the shoulder and pointing to the sky so that you don't sort of get too front loaded with sort of, most of the people missing the impact, right? So it sounds from the way that McDonald's story sounded like you really needed to sort of build the momentum to make sure you got critical mass of the audience engaged. And that's where you started to accelerate the story in there, which is sort of the opposite of a YouTube video, right? The YouTube videos, you got to have a really strong hook. And then some people are going to skip, 2 seconds in if you didn't catch them, right? You're basically saying, no, we got to sort of build the momentum in the sky and get everybody excited. And then when we feel like everybody's turned around and pointing, all right, that's when we start the real choreography.
Exactly right. Look, less than 1% of people have seen a drone light show in
Right.
person. And obviously, the cadence and the timing of storytelling will evolve as more people are used to it as an artistic medium. But for right now, what the heck is that? Is the primary reaction that we see from people. We've done
Right.
shows, say, on South Beach in Miami, where folks have seen it from like 20 or 30 blocks away and have just walked towards it and kept walking because they wanted to see what on earth is going on over there. So I think for now, building and making sure to increase engagement as the shows go on and to keep people engaged. It's like keeping someone's attention in 2024 in this era of sort of fractured attention spans and cell phones and TikTok and everything everywhere all at once, right in your hands. Keeping people engaged for 10 minutes at a time is a small act of magic. And building our storytelling to make sure that people aren't petering out 4 or 5 or 6 minutes into the display is a huge part of what we try to bring to life.
Absolutely. So for those folks who are, now sort of entranced with the idea that, wait, maybe we should do this, like whether they're an
Listen to
agent on the
Kevin.
agency side or on the brand side or whatever. How should they start thinking about it from a venue perspective? I mean, one of the things we were just really lucky with for the possible conference in South Beach in Miami was that the wind was like right at the edge, right? Where if it had been a little bit windy or in particularly gusty wind, I think you guys might have had to pull the plug. So certainly this isn't appropriate for every venue. So for people who are thinking about plugging this into something that they already have on the calendar, what are the things they should think about?
So location is a big part of it. During the day for a big show, and we can get granular, but you need about 10,000 square feet of space on the ground somewhere for us to set up the grid, for us to lay out the drones, and that's a process that takes really a good chunk of the day. We like to have our pilots, our grid managers on the ground early, setting up the grid, getting everything ready to go, ensuring connectivity is good. The dream day for us is that they're sitting there bored with nothing to do for 4 hours or 5 hours because it's been a nice smooth day, but we want to build in buffer because we're dealing with new technology. And on some level, it's kind of simple and we could talk about how the tech works. On another level, we're flying like 400 or 500 lawnmowers in the sky at once. So safety is always paramount in what we do. And if it means that we build extra time into our days to make sure that everything is going to work right, it's the right way to do things. The bigger headache from an event perspective, and it's always able to be solved, but it can be a bit of a headache, is the footprint when it's in the sky. Because your 10,000 square feet on the ground may balloon up to 600,000 square feet in the sky that we need to be able to cordon off because we can't fly over people and we can't fly over active roadways. So we always need to build out safety perimeters, but we always want to expect the best, but plan for the worst. So we have geofencing around where we fly. A soft geofence where if a drone hits it, it's programmed to return home. And a hard geofence where if for any reason a drone gets outside that soft geofence, hardwired into every drone, it drops when it hits the hard geofence. And we build out a safety perimeter to ensure that basic trigonometry, highest height of the drone, fast as it goes, we build our safety perimeters to ensure that no one could ever come into contact with a drone. I think it's one of the most important things is to ensure if you're doing a drone show that you have proper and appropriate safety perimeters so that nobody is ever at any risk. In terms of thinking of timelines and things like that, permitting can take time if we're near an airport, or if we're in restricted airspace. It's something that we always handle, that we work through with you. But there are certain airspaces where we're going to need 30 days or we're going to need 90 days to ensure that we can get the proper permitting from the FAA for what we need to do. But otherwise, at least the way we try to do things, call us up and we'll work with you to figure out all of the logistics. And look, it's the policy at Pixis that if it's not going to be a good show, if it's not going to be a good visual, I'm going to tell you to go do something else with that budget or figure out a more appropriate activation down the line to go after.
Great. Well, let's finish off then with the technology. So, obviously, there's not humans directly controlling each of the drone, right? It's a computer that understands where each drone should be at each second in time, right? So that it can change colors and change its location, etc. So, how does that all work?
Sure. So each show has two pilots, a primary pilot in chief and a what we call a red button or a secondary pilot who's there for emergencies. Essentially, the shows fly two different ways. We set up a Wi-Fi network at each site and really create a bubble in the sky that the drones will fly in. Additionally, we connect to the drones through RTK, which is real-time kinematics. Essentially, it's the satellites in the sky. And on average, we connect to between 28 and 34 satellites around the globe for every single show that we do to ensure redundancy in our connection to our drones if there's ever any safety issue or anything along those lines. The takeoff itself is handled by the pilot in chief. But once the drones get up into a grid and you'll see it that they go up, say, here's 125 and another 125, another 125, another 125. So you've got 4 rows of drones up in the sky, about 150 feet up in the air. And there's a moment where they all start to spread out and they start to do what they're supposed to do. That's when the dance takes over. That's when the pre-programming of the drones kicks in. So we essentially program each drone to go to individual points in the sky, turn particular colors, stay in that spot for a certain amount of time, fly to the next one and the next one and the next one until the show is complete. So each individual drone actually has no idea of what the other drones around it are up to. They know this is my path and this is when I come back. So a lot of the work of this goes into ensuring that all of those path files are safe, that the drones never pass within a certain threshold of one another in the sky. From the ground, sometimes it looks like they're a couple of inches apart. And it's a trick of the eye because generally they don't fly closer than about 2 meters. So they're usually, we've usually got about 6 feet of space between the drones. But to the naked eye, our eyes are very good at sort of correcting gaps between things and piecing together images. It looks very, very close together. And obviously, where this is going technologically in the future is figuring out how we can reprogram in real time if a drone doesn't take off or something like that, that we can repiece and move things around or perhaps have an extra drone fly up into the sky to replace one that didn't take off or that's having, a light issue or some sort of headache along those lines. In terms of weather, we can fly in the rain, we can fly in light snow. The problem is people aren't outside and they don't want to be outside. And it gets in the way of content capture as well. If you've got rain coming down around it, you're not going to get a great show. So our company, we work with you to reschedule, to figure out an alternate date, to figure out an alternate activation that makes sense. Wind, we do have a decent tolerance for wind. We can fly in sustained winds up to 17 knots, which is about 19 and a half miles an hour of wind and gusts, another 10 miles more than that. So we have a good range of outcomes in terms of wind. Generally, most places, maybe we have to delay a little bit. Wind tends to cool down at night, tends to lessen. That if it ends up that we build into an area where we have weather concerns, we simply build a little bit of extra time into the overall run of show.
Cool. Well, Thanks so much for sharing, the story about how you got into the space and some of the stories about some really cool client activations and shows. Look forward to seeing your show maybe next year if possible, or certainly at other locations as I wander around at shows.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time, and just want to give a lot of credit to Casey Torres, who is our primary point of contact if possible, who all through locking us in through all the story that we told there was a huge part of it. Just very, very grateful for her work and everybody at the Possible team for bringing us down there, and I'm glad that brought us together.
Absolutely. Great.
Kevin, thank you, man.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.